Welcome to Storytime with I Have Issues. Today's story is called The Case of the Stolen Worm. Let us begin. Wolfgang loved worms. His troops knew it. His enemies knew it. Unfortunately, his wife knew it too. She was a rather ugly woman, eyes set far apart, like the distance one can run in a second at the sight of something hideous. They were kind of square and red, bloodshot from the long hours she spent at the wharf, grabbing the sharks as they swam by. It wasn't her job. No one at the docks really knew why she jogged the 4.32 miles every single morning to grab sharks, nor did they care to know what she did with them all. She would run, pulling a long braided piece of twine attached to a little red wagon, hoping it would be enough room for the more than 15 sharks she could grab in 1 hour's time. What a trooper. Mrs. Commander Wolfgang smiled to herself, whistling a song from the Music Man, something about trombones, while skinning and preparing the shark meat for her ritualistic dance out in the ring of stones on a full moon at midnight. It's weird. And the song she was humming was 76 trombones in the big parade, la da 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 da, la da 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 da. Some shark goo splattered on the already caked yellow flowered wallpaper. The kitchen was a 4x6 room with an extremely large refrigerator next to a disgustingly small stove. Her large, muscular, leathery-like baseball glove hands slipped, sending the Kit Ray Mortheseth sort of shadows flying across the room, narrowly missing the portrait of the commander, his one gold tooth shining more brilliantly than the other three. Mrs. Commander Wolfgang was not quick enough on her feet, however, to prevent the knife from beheading her Chucky doll. She just loved her movie memorabilia. Jonathan Sue Weeble came running when he heard her garbled, insidious cries. The commander's repugnant and oily neighbor came bursting into the all too familiar kitchen. You know what I'm talking about. Mrs. Commander Wolfgang scrubbed the Mickey Mouse coffee mug for Mr. Weeble after she calmed down. Decaf coffee was churning in the coffee pot. It smelled luscious. On the cup, there was a residue, a dried up glop, really, that Mrs. Commander Wolfgang was now scrubbing with one of those steel wool thingies. The glop from Mr. Weeble's light pink chewed up gum from his visit last Friday. There had been many days like this, scrubbing coffee cups, of coffee churning, and smiles and whatnot, when Mr. Jonathan Sue Weeble would visit. Usually, he came 5 days a week, around noon, the days the commander worked at the docks. Mrs. Commander Wolfgang and her lonely off-kilter world Excuse me, I burped. Didn't notice Mr. Jonathan Sue Weeble's drooping eyelids, the hairy nostrils, and the one bushy sideburn. Nor did she care about the hump, grapefruit sized. That's like this. Located on Mr. Weeble's cranium, directly in between the crown of his still soft head and his right ear. So it's right here. She assumed it was just a rogue pimple that had never been treated when he was an awkward teen. Scruffy ran boldly up the ramp onto the Wallapalooza, where the commander stood proudly on its deck, one hand behind his back, standing so straight and tall, so proud. It was docked at the pier. Never did venture out to sea. He attacked the commander, biting his finger almost completely off. The commander screamed in agony, jumping up and down, wondering why he ever bought that stupid chihuahua. Missing the dog with his big fat boot, Commander Wolfgang fell onto his behind on the hard wooden surface. Harry, the ship's nursemaid, ran to the commander, wondering what could cause such calamity in such a normally very strong, courageous commander. At first glance, it looked like a paper cut. But after much coercing, the commander convinced Harry of the injury's severity and the need for ointment, splints, and Novocaine. Miss Worm, the not-so-unpretty, not very undelicate waitress, brought over the commander's peppermint tea, just like usual. The steam rose up to his bifocals, creating in Miss Worm a fog-like effect that he found rather alluring. Alluring. It's a hard word to say. She was far more beautiful than Mrs. Commander Wolfgang, which wasn't saying much. More radiant, more... As she walked to another table, Commander Wolfgang said in a quiet voice, "She is the most beautiful worm I have ever seen. I must marry her." The commander was still... Okay, what the commander did not know was that at the very next booth listening in was his wife, scooping up her beef stew with a fork, eating hungrily. Her head came up from the bowl of food while he spoke, and a gleam slithered into her eyes, a gleam of malice. The commander was still staring after Miss Worm, who was walking too far away, seeming to fade into the counter that wrapped around the noisy, clanging kitchen, stools manned by hungry men whose weary wives had made one too many tuna casseroles. The commander frantically waved at the fog from his stupid tea, but it was too late. Miss Worm was gone. Dispersed like ash in a fire, like a vampire at first light. But how could that be? How could she just disappear like that? The commander asked the shrunken tea bag. The cook, Eddie Paul, noticed the commander speaking to the tea bag and left his greasy spatula and took his brownish, toothy grin over to the commander, a man he hated almost as much as he hated beef jerky. "Hey, you know, Miss Worm?" The commander glanced up with a gleam of hope in his eye. "Yes, where is she?" "Your wife drove off with her in the trunk, man. I think they were going to some kind of party or something. The commander's screams were heard all the way to Bings County, some 15 miles away. The commander left a 5% tip, tripped over the Coke machine cord on his way out, and banged his head on the Bings County Tribune metal newspaper stand. The commander sits in his red and green plaid chair, sipping on a cup of Jell-O through a pink and blue striped straw. His eye is glassy, his lips curled in a permanent smile. With every passerby, he asks, "Have you seen my worm? It's missing, it's been stolen." But no one knows what he's talking about, and no one cares.